Hello everyone and welcome back. This is first of the many part series where we will build a real-world Maui application from start to end. I hope you have all gone through my introduction video which I posted last week, in which I described what we will be building during the course of this series. So without any further ado, let's get started. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Consider this as a reference application only. There are many things and many architectural patterns and many different ways of doing things that we will cover as part of this application, but treat them as guidance only. There are many different ways of doing the same thing. There is no right or wrong way. Of course, there is a good way and a bad way. Something that works for you, please take that and implement in your own applications. Something which does not resonate to you, please feel free to ignore that and use an alternative. Additionally, please get in touch with me if you have any questions, you have any doubts. Please feel free to drop me a note on Twitter. Let's get the conversation going. I have posted my Twitter handle over here. Also, I highly suggest that you subscribe to my YouTube channel where I'll be posting future parts of the same series. So if you like, please subscribe to the channel and also give a thumbs up to this video. So let's get started. So let us pull up our Visual Studio. Here we go. And we are going to create a new multi-platform MAUI application. Now at this stage, I want you to pause and think, are we doing something wrong? I believe we are making a mistake. It is too early to even open Visual Studio and create a project and start working on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cancel this. And in fact, there are a couple of questions that we should answer before we can proceed any further. We are building a real-world application. Forget about whether it is a real-world application or it is something that you're doing as part of your project or even for your learning. There are a couple of questions that you need to answer upfront. These questions are what and how. Without answering these questions, you should not jump into the Visual Studio and start coding. So what are these questions? What is the what part? So very first thing you have to do, you have to take a step back and you have to think about your application. What should your application do? Who are your target audiences? What are the features that you want to have in your application? How does the application UI look like? I'm not talking about the UI design, I'm talking more from the perspective of UI wireframes and mockups. You need to think about all of these things and understand what your application is doing, what are the features. In our case, it is a YouTube clone application. So obviously, we need to have things such as ability to search for videos, view video details, of course, play videos, and many more. So before we start building, we will do all of that. The next thing you need to answer is the how part. So how are you going to build your application? There are three main areas that you need to consider. The very first thing you need to think and you need to pay great attention to is the user interface design and the user experience design as well. Think about your UI design from get-go itself. Do not make it an afterthought that once you have made the application, then you will come back and revamp the application to make it look nice. Trust me, in my experience, or many people that I have spoken to, it does not work that way. Once your application is ready, functionally ready, it is very difficult to go back and change the UI design because that may require some major breaking changes to your application. And moreover, there is this concept of burnout. After so many weeks and months that you have been building the application, Your application is functionally complete. You just want to get this application into the app stores and into the user hands. You do not want to spend any more time. So think about the UI design upfront. Think about screen designs. Think about what icons you need to have in your application. Where are you going to get these icons from? What color schemes are you going to use? Are you going to use any other assets in your application, in your design? For example, for the logo, for the screen, for the app icons, any other graphics within your application, where are you going to get these resources from? Are you going to hire a graphics designer to do some of these things for you? These are the questions you need to get answered. Also think about the animations. Animations, or in fact, smooth animations, make your application much more appealing to the end users. Think about the animations as well. The second thing you need to worry about or consider is your data sources. Where does your data come from? Is it in-sourced, as in you have the data in-house, you are the provider of this data, in which case you may have some backend APIs that you may need to build, or you already have these APIs already built, or the information is going to come from outside resources. If that is the case, first of all, is the information even available to you? Is the information available in the context that you want it to be? Are there any limitations in relation to your application? For example, in your application, you may want to display something, but your API does not even provide you that information. You need to have all of these considered upfront. And lastly, and most importantly, you need to consider the architecture of your application. There are many things that you need to consider. I will just go over a few of them. For example, which framework you are going to use. Are you going to build your own framework, or are you going to use an existing one or a third-party one? A very simple example for this is consider the MVVM frameworks. Especially in the Xamarin Forms and Maui world, we are accustomed to building applications using the MVVM pattern, and there are some many good libraries which are available. There is Prism, there is MVVM Cross, there is MVVM Lite, and many more. All of these have their own pros and cons. You have to choose the one which you are comfortable with. Or if you believe that none of these libraries fulfill the requirements that you have, you may go about rolling out your own framework. Think about what target devices and idioms you are going to target for. For example, is your application only going to be targeted for mobile users, or you are also going to target for desktop users? In that case, what other different idioms you want to support? Are you also going to support iPads? Are you going to support Android tablets? Are you going to support small devices versus large devices? Another important aspect you need to think upfront is what external libraries or components you will require for your application. For example, in our YouTube clone application, we will require to bring in an external library to download YouTube videos. Now, downloading YouTube videos is not a straightforward thing. I did write a library a few years back, around 6, 7 years back, where I passed the HTML or the response coming back from the video page of YouTube, extracted the links, the streaming links, and downloaded the video, wrote a lot of code for that. The problem with that approach is every now and then Google changes the way they present the information and the location within the HTML page where the streaming links are stored. So I was always on my heels, always on the back foot, making changes and accommodating to the changes made by Google. So in this case, we will be using a third-party library called YouTube Explode, which will allow us to easily download the YouTube video. Think about some of the security concerns. Now, this may or may not be relevant to you, but depending on which industry you are in, for example, if you are building an application for the banking sector or maybe for healthcare industry, this is definitely very important. think about things such as access via VPNs. Assuming you are building a banking application and you do not want your application to be accessed via or from a sanctioned country. In that case, you may also want to disable VPN. It is always a good practice to make sure that the users of your application are not accessing your application via VPN from a sanctioned country. You may need to think about certificate pinning, root and jailbreak detection, uh, obfuscation of your application. You are going to put your application in the app stores. It may contain some sensitive and intellectual property logic that you have written. You may not want anyone to take your application, reverse engineer it, and get the logic. If you are building uh, an application for, again, banking sector or for healthcare, you may want to encrypt the data which you are storing locally on your device. You may also want to blur the screen the moment you go to the task manager. On your mobile devices, you can go to the task manager to see all your running applications, and you will notice it shows you the screenshot or the last screen of the application that you were using. You may want to blur this so that if your phone gets into someone's hand or in the wrong hands, even if they go to the task manager, they should not be able to see the screen. You may want to enable biometric authentication in your application, especially for some of the secure applications. You may want either a fingerprint or facial recognition every time you go into the application. Also consider about anything related to performance as well. This is highly important, and you need to make sure that your app is performant and your users will be delighted when using the application. No one will like an application where it takes ages for the screens to come up. If your application does require a wait time, consider some other design patterns such as showing loading screens or keeping the users informed properly so that they know there is something coming their way and they can wait. So this is the how and the what part. Now with this, we can really get started for real this time. So let me end this show. Before we go further, what we are going to do, let's start by answering a couple of questions. So I'm going to use a tool called Notion. It allows me to quickly jot down my thoughts. Now, it can be a tool like this. It can be your notepad, your Microsoft Word, your physical piece of paper and pen, anything that you are comfortable with. Go ahead, always take notes. Anything that you are doing, whatever is in your mind, please put a pen to it, write it on a paper or somewhere digitally so that you do not forget. So in this particular case, I'm going to just record some of the information which might be useful to our application. So let's say it's a YouTube application, and what are the features that we need to have? Remember, we were discussing that we need to have different features. This is part of the thought process before you even start building the application. So of course, we want to search for videos, okay, display the list of videos. Uh, Now, one of the things that you may want to do is you may want to implement infinite scrolling. What I mean by that is, as and when you are scrolling through the videos, you do not want to bring in hundreds or even thousands of videos upfront and present it on the screen. That will obviously take a lot of memory and it will make your application very slow. So the best part is you only show few videos at a time, be it 5, 10, 20, 50, and as and when the user scrolls down, and when it reaches towards the end of the scrolling, you fetch the new videos from the APIs and display them towards the end. What else we are going to have? We are going to have a video detail page, okay, where we are going to show details about the video, such as the duration or the runtime of the video, who is the author, how many likes, how many subscriber views, etc. We are going to have the ability to share a video with our friends. If we are watching a video, we may want to share it with someone. We want to, of course, play the video, and we want to download the video. So these are the high-level applications that you need to have. Now, the next thing is also you need to consider is the UI design. So for UI design, I usually go to sites such as Dribble, Behance, or Uplabs to search for inspirations. I'm not talking about copying, I'm talking about inspirations. In this particular case, when I wanted to make this particular video or this particular application, I searched all over Dribble and Behance and Uplabs, and then this is the design that I really liked. So let me open it up on the screen a bit bigger. So this is the design that I really like, the color scheme, the presentation. Of course, in my case, not everything is applicable. As I said, this is just an inspiration. You do not need to take it as such. You just take the elements of the design, especially the high level design, the visual elements, the color schemes, the fonts, etc. And then you can tweak it based on the requirements of your application. So this is the design that we will be using for our application. So now, with this having said that, let's start building our application. So I'm going to start with a .NET MAUI application. I'm going to call it two-player. Okay, store it in the same location, that is fine. Create the project. So it is going to go and create the project for us. This is a .NET MAUI project. Let me close in everything for now. Now, the very first thing I will do, I am going to add another project to this solution. Now, that project you may already have, but in this particular case, we are building it upfront, afresh. So we will create that project. This is going to be a common project which we will be using across many of our applications. Take an example. There are some common things that you have which you need to use in every application. Something like some common converters that you want to use, some common helper functionality, some extension methods, some MVVM related uh, classes, uh, some services. So all of these you need to have in your common framework, and you can reuse them again and again. So in this, we are going to create a new project, but this time around, I'm going to create a .NET MAUI class library. Again, it is going to be a .NET 6 project, and I'm going to call it maui.apps.framework. So this is the project name I'm going to give. And it has created this class 1. We can delete that, do not need it. Okay. Now, the very first thing that I usually do is I go ahead and I clean up my projects. One thing that I really like is the new feature in C# 10, wherein we can use global usings across our project. It is a great feature, and it allows you to put all your using statements in one common file so that your actual source code files look very clean. So the first thing that I do is I go about and I add a new class called global usings. You can give it any name. The name is not important in all the projects that I am working with. So let me add it to both the projects. So here you go. We have got global using classes. One important thing, you do not need anything in these classes. So we can go ahead and we can delete it. The very next thing I do is I clean up my CS project files. So let me go to the Maui Applications Framework project first, and let me edit the project file. In this project, there is not much that I need to do. Maybe if I'm not targeting Tizen and I do not intend to, so rather than leaving this commented out, I may remove this altogether. One other thing that I personally do for my projects, I'm not going to do over here because that is going to start another conversation, which I do not want to get into right now, is this implicit usings. I do not like implicit usings in my project. This is a new feature which has come up with Visual Studio 2022 and .NET 6 projects, wherein some of the common framework classes, such as your using systems, using system.io, using system.net, or using Microsoft.maui.app.compatibility, etc. Some of these common using statements are already available as part of your project using a concept known as source generators. In my personal projects, I usually go and disable this. So instead of leaving it enabled, I disable it, and then whatever is required, I put them in my global using classes so that I have better control of what I want in my projects. So this is cleaning up the framework project. I can now do the same for my main project. So in this, I can also remove this. Okay, what is our application name? Our application title is going to be Tube Player. What is the application ID? Maybe we can give it the company name, com.exino.tubeplayer, any version number, anything else that you want to change, you can do it over here. Now, one thing that I will also want to do is for our application icon and splash icons, I want to change the background colors. By default, if you run these applications, you will notice that the background color of your icons or your splash screen is a purplish, bluish kind of a color. In my case, I want to have it dark gray kind of a color. So that is what we will do. I'm going to change this over here. So for my app icon, the background color is #262626, which is a dark black color, dark gray color. And the same I'm going to do for my splash screen. And we can save this. One other thing that you may also want to do is if you are not targeting Tizen, you can go ahead and you can delete the Tizen folder from your platforms subfolder. I usually do that, but I leave it up to you. If you want to target Tizen, then please do not delete this, or even in future, if you want to, you can leave it over here. But in my case, I'm not planning to do that. Now, the next thing is adding some common NuGet packages. There are a couple of NuGet packages that we will be adding, and these are the ones which we'll be using very extensively in our application. The first one that we want to add, and in fact, I'm going to add them to both the projects, and I will show you when I start using them. The very first one that I want to add is communitytoolkit.mvvm. Communitytoolkit.mvvm package. So this is a great package which has been released, I think just 3-4 months ago. Up until last 4 months ago or so, I always used to rely on other MVVM frameworks to provide me implementation of I notify property changed objects, or even roll out my own classes and write all the boilerplate code to implement the I notify property changes, and some of the other things, especially say the working with commands. If you have worked with Xamarin Forms or any other framework, you would know that you have to have a delegate command or a relay command or some sort of an implementation, which may be coming from another third-party library, or you may be using the basic I command implementation of the platform, and you may be building something on top of that, and then to use it in your applications, you will have to declare a property which you can bind from XAML, and then in the constructor or some other place, you have to instantiate it, passing in the class or the delegate function where you will do the actual work. Community toolkit.mvvm is a great package. It reduces all of this boilerplate code from many lines to literally, just one line in many of the cases. I started using it 3-4 months ago and I have not gone back. So I'm going to add it to both of my projects, my framework project as well as my tube player project. So accept the license. The other NuGet package that I want to add is the monkeycache.file store. Now you may, in our application, we are going to be relying on APIs to get information from YouTube. Now, what if your information is not changing that much? Take an example. When you are searching for videos, of course, you want to go and hit the API each and every time to get the fresh information. But when you are viewing a video, how many times the video information will change? For example, the video description is not going to change. The video link or the video play information is not going to change. What may change is the number of views or the number of likes for this video, which you may not want to update each and every time. So if I'm using my application and I have gone to one video, after 2 days, if I go to the same video, maybe I do not want to hit the API service to get the fresh information. I want to have it locally cached and serve it from my cache. So I'm going to save a trip to the server or trip using the internet bandwidth. So for that, we are going to be using monkey cache. So let me bring in monkey cache dot file store. In this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on the include pre-releases and bring in the version 2 beta, which is compatible with .NET 6 and to be used in .NET MAUI applications. Of course, in any of your projects, if you do not need this caching functionality, you can skip this step. Okay, so now we have got the main projects created. Let's go ahead and create the project structures. So in my main project, I usually like to have a folder for converters. This is the place where I will put in some common converters, which I will use across the applications. I will create a folder for exceptions. This is where we will put some common exceptions that we can use across our applications. Now, one example for this, which you will see very soon, is I will create a named exception called internet connection exception. That is to identify or see in case if my internet connection is not available, I will want to throw out this named exception rather than throwing a general exception, then figuring out what kind of exception it is. I will throw a named exception. You can have a hierarchy of catch exceptions and then act accordingly. And I'm also going to have a folder for, sorry, I'm going to have some common extension methods, extensions on date times, extensions on lists, strings, some common things that I usually do. We will also have some helper methods, which we will use again and again, some MVVM related common functionality, some services, and some user interface elements that we can reuse. So this is the project structure for the main framework. Now, similarly, we can do the same for our application as well. Now, for our application, of course, we are going to have some common helper methods I'm just going to create the structures now, but I will be explaining later on what we will be doing. Then I'm going to have some services in my application, but for every service, I do not want to have it just as a service. I will also implement it via an interface so that I can use dependency injection. So we will create a folder called iServices. I am going to have some models in my project. Of course, view models and views. In addition to the views, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a new folder right now called the interfaces for the views, and I will explain later on how I plan to use it. I will implement all my pages and all my views via an interface so that I can use it in different ways across different kind of applications. And we are also going to have a folder for view controls. This is the place where I'll be storing or I'll be building reusable controls which I can use across my application. So this is the project structure that we have. One thing I will also do is in my view models, I will have another subfolder and I will call it base. So this is where we'll define a base view model, which all of our other view models will inherit from. And similarly, in my views, I will have the same. I will create a base page or a master page, which all of our application pages will derive from and provide us with consistent look and feel. Now, one thing which I think I missed is we were talking about where to get our data from. So we are going to get our data from YouTube APIs. So you also need to search if you have this information available to you. So you can search for YouTube API. It will take you to the Google's YouTube API page. You can read about everything which is available to you, how to use it. The simple way to do this is click on the API Explorer over here and play with the APIs yourself. So you can see these are different APIs which are available. As an example, you have the search API and it has a list endpoint which you can call. So this is the documentation. This is the base URL that you need to call. You need to pass in what part you want to get. So snippet is the basic information that you want to get and what query information you want. Let's say you want to search for Maui conference, right? Or Maui conf. These are all the different parameters that you can provide. In our case, this is pretty much it. You can untick the Google OAuth 2.0 box and execute and see the result that comes back. So you can see this is the result which has come back. It is returning 5 videos in this one API call with the next page token, which if you call again with this next token, which is a parameter over here, page token, it will return you the next 5 videos. So and then these are the videos which are returned. So this is a video which is called .NET Conference Focus on .NET MAUI. This is the description, the thumbnail in different resolutions, when it was published at, and so on. So this is how we will be using the information. It is from the channel .NET and so on. If you want to get information about a particular video, let's say this particular video, you can get the ID of this video and then you can go to the videos API and then you can again get information. So here you can get much more information. You want to get information, let's say you want to get statistics for this video. statistics, and maybe in fact snippet as well, the basic information, and then we pass in the video ID. Execute. Okay, sorry, statistics. The request quota exceeded. Okay, so here we go. I just executed it again. So it gave me the information about the video. And if I go down, I can see that these are the view counts. This video has received 21,000 views with 750 likes and 29 comments. Similarly, we can go to the comments threads to get comments that have been posted against a particular video. So in this particular case, for this video, we can see there are 29 comments. I can go and let's look at the snippet is fine. And the video ID is the same one. Execute. And you can see these are the comments which have been posted. So someone called Ratnesh Kumar posted this comment, or this is another comment which is posted. So this is the API that we will be using. All right, so back to our Visual Studio. Now the other important thing that I want to do is, again, upfront, is to add the or change the splash screens or the application icons if needed. Now this is extremely important because once we have started building, we usually tend to forget about this, and even when we are demonstrating our application, we are showing with the same .NET, that purple color, which we changed it to the dark gray color, that same icon, which may or may not look nice when you are giving demo to the people. So in my case, I am going to change the icons. So in this particular case, I already have the icons which I searched on the internet already, and I have made them available. So I'm going to go to my resources, and I'm just going to bring in these app icons. So you will notice these are already available. So I'm just going to replace them and say yes, I'm going to replace, override these two files, and same thing I'm going to do with my splash screen. Overwrite the file. So now if I run the application, let me quickly run this and show you and see how it looks like. This is the first time it is building the application, so give it a while. Meanwhile, it is loading. Let me show you what else we will be doing. So in the same folder, I brought in a couple of fonts that we'll be using. So I am not going to be using the Open Sans font, which is the default in .NET MAUI applications. I will be using the Fira Sans font from Google Fonts. This to me provides better look and feel than the built-in font or the one provided. Additionally, I will be requiring some images, some common images that we will be using across our applications. Let me show you some of them. Let's say, have a look at this error icon or error image. Whenever there is an error that happens in our application, rather than showing a pop-up message or crashing the application, it is always good if you display the information properly to the user on the screen, visual information with an icon and what this error is all about. So yeah, you can see over here, The splash screen icon color has been changed. The icon has been changed. So it is looking much nicer now, rather than the standard purple color that is default out of the box. So here is the app icon. So coming back, sorry, to the icons, maybe if you want to, let's have a look at the like icon. We'll be showing the like icon, uh, to share icon, maybe no internet if you are not connected to the internet, uh, download icon. So these are some of the common icons which I have sourced from icons8.com, and I will be using these icons in my application. So I'm going to bring them in under my images folder. So here you go. So I've got my icons, I have got my splash screen and my images. The last thing I'm going to bring in is my fonts. So as I said, I will be using the Fira Sans font. So I'm going to bring in the Fira Sans font. One thing that I noticed in Visual Studio 22 for Mac, when I bring in an app icon, sorry, a font, it does not set the build action to Maui font by default. So I have to go and manually do that. I did not notice this problem when working with Visual Studio for Windows. So let me do that. Here you go. Okay. Now, one additional thing that I also like to do is if you go to the resources folder, and in fact, before that, let's go to the app.xml file. You will notice that we are relying on a couple of resource or style files which are available to us. One is the colors and the other is the styles. If we go to the resources/styles folder, you will see there are these colors which have been defined for you, and there are these styles which have been defined for each of the control type. For example, for activity indicator, for a button, for a checkbox, and so on. Now, in my personal opinion, and again, depending on how you are building the applications, I found that many of the times I do not need any of these styles. And in fact, I will anyways be overriding it with the styles that I need. And I do not need a style for everything. I should only define a style wherever required for the controls which I'm using in my application. So usually what I do from the start, from get-go, I delete all these styles from my application and I will define my own styles. So I can go ahead and I can delete it. If it works for you and you want to use these, please go ahead and use them as such. So I would want to define my own styles. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to define some colors that I will use for my application. Uh, In fact, let me copy paste to save some time, and I'll walk you through them. So I have some colors. My formatting is all messed up. Here you go. So I have a color for my page background. I have a dark color, light color, a dark text color, and a light text color. Now, additionally, what I also want to do is I want to bring in some common styles. Let me bring them in. So I have a style for my content page. So for every page that I create in my application, be it of the type content page or any derived page type, which we will see because we will be creating the master page and all the content pages will be deriving from this master page. I want to make sure in my particular application, I do not want to show the navigation bar. I want to have the background color of the page as page background color, which is this dark color that we saw, the same color we are using for the splash screen. And I want to have no padding in my pages. Similarly, for my navigation page, I want to have the bar background color same as my page background so that it is blending in nicely. The bar text color is white, background color is again the same, and the icon color is white. Then I have a style for my grid. By default, I want all my grids to have zero padding, zero margin, zero row and column spacing. I want them to vertically and horizontally fill all the space and no background color. Then I have some styles for the borders. Uh, Up until Xamarin Forms, we used to heavily rely on frames to display information in the form of cards. Frames are very nice visual elements wherein you can provide elevation, you can provide shadows, and you can have some content inside. You can define a border. It looks very nice. Now, the problem with frames is even from Xamarin Forms stage itself, the frames I found it to be a little inconvenient to use. First of all, as per the documentation or whatever I've heard, it is a very heavy object. And secondly, there are a lot of inconsistencies when it comes to rendering on Android versus iOS. So with .NET MAUI, they introduced a new border control, which is a very lightweight control. It allows you to simply draw a border, and it is a container, and you can definitely have shadows on it. It's a very nice, simple control, and this is what we will be using throughout the application in place of frames. There are still, or in fact, just one place where I found I cannot use border, but that is more of a bug in .NET MAUI at the moment. I will show that, or I will discuss about that when we come to that particular place. Again, same thing, no margin, no padding, and I want the vertical and horizontal options to be filled. And then this is my collection view style, zero margin. For the item sizing strategy, I want to default it to my first item because in majority of the cases, I have noticed the collection views that I create will have items of the same size. So this will save me performance because we'll just measure the size of the first item and it will not have to go through measurement of each and every item. Of course, there will be some places where you want to have items of different sizes. In that case, you will have to change it to measure all items. But that on case-to-case basis, we can change. Same thing, horizontal, vertical option set to filled, background color is transparent, and I do not want to see the horizontal and the vertical scroll bars. The scroll bars that come on the side, these ones. I do not want to have them visible on the screen. And by default, I want to have selection mode set to none because I will not be doing any selection or any click handling on collection views in the code behind. I'll be doing all of that in my view models. So this is my app.xaml style. Let's save this one. Next thing is, let me minimize this. Next thing is we will go to app.xaml. And one of the things I usually want to do is enable version tracking in my applications. Uh, in this application, it is not very relevant, but this is just something that I wanted to show you. I have noticed that, or at least in some of my other applications, I want to do certain things whenever I release an update for an application. I want to ensure that if I'm upgrading from this version to this version, or if this is the first time I'm running this particular version, I want to perform some extra steps. So this is a great way. And if you enable it from the first day or from start, you will be able to handle it. So let's say enable version tracking. You need to go to the app.xaml file and just version tracking dot track. That's all you have to do. Now, another trick that I'm going to show you, not applicable for this project because I'm running this on a Mac, but if you're running it on Windows, you will find it extremely useful. Now, one of the things that you may have noticed whenever you run the application, first of all, Maui allows you to target both desktops as well as mobile devices. So in this particular case, I ran my application on my iPhone simulator. But what if I'm running this on my Mac? Or if I'm on the Windows machine, I may want to run it on my Windows as a Windows application. Because first of all, running in the emulators is a bit slow. So you may want to quickly test it using the Mac devices, the Mac Catalyst or your Windows. Let me just run it while it is loading. I'll tell you the problem. So once the application loads, you will notice that the application comes up in a wide rectangular window, which is not how your mobile devices look like. Let's say you are creating this application and you're targeting the user interface for a mobile application, for a mobile device, which uh, is it called portrait mode? Like this. But when the Windows application comes up, it will come up in the landscape mode. So the user interface definitely is not going to look the same. So there is a small trick that we can do, especially on Windows. I have still to find a workaround for Mac Catalyst so that the application looks the same. So we will apply some small piece of code in our application using if-def, hash if conditional compilation, wherein every time when you run the application on Windows, it will come up in this size, in this format, exactly as it looks like on a mobile device. So to do that simply, what you need to do is just have this simple piece of code. So before my namespace, I'm just going to define saying if I'm running it on Windows, then bring in using Microsoft.ui and Microsoft.graphics, Windows.graphics and Microsoft.ui.windowing. And then I'm going to bring in a couple of constants that I can use in my application. So this is the application size or the window size. So it will be 540 wide and 1000 height, which will give me more or less the way a Windows application or a mobile application looks like. And then after my version tracking, I'm just going to bring in this piece of code. I'm going to override the default handler for Windows, saying whenever the window is created, if it is on Windows, then resize the window to this width and height, the one that I have specified over here. So why did it fail? Let me run it again. Maybe because we were making changes while we were running the application. Okay, it looks like that Mac Catalyst is not behaving today for me. Anyways, let this run in the background and we'll move on. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to define some pages for my application. The very first thing I will tell you that I am not a huge fan of using App Shell in my applications. It's just a personal choice. I want to use simple navigation page and define my own pages and do the navigation on my own. Because one of the things I notice with App Shell especially is it is very, very difficult to customize the bottom uh, tab bar and also uh, the the hamburger menus if you want to. Let me show you an example of what I mean. Yeah, here it is. Let me bring in an application. Here we go. So this is an application which I've already built and it is available on the app stores. So here you will notice the moment I click on the hamburger menu, instead of showing the default way of showing this side menu, I am doing this in a different way with some animation and a different style. So you can see over here. Similarly, on some of the applications, I may want to have a different uh, bottom tab bar. So for that reason, I prefer to do it using my own pages. So let me go back. So what we will do is I'm going to go to my views and I'm going to start creating some pages. I'm going to have a .NET MAUI content page. Let's call it start page. So this is a page that we will have. And then what I can do is I can delete my app shell and then the main page. I do not need this in my application. I will go ahead and delete this and I will adjust my app.xaml to say my main page is new navigation page, new start page. We will be changing that very soon. So let me go and bring in using tubeplayer.views. And this is what is a candidate for global usings. So we can go to the global usings and I can add it over here. So it is available to me all the time. Okay. Now what we will do, we'll also start building our framework library as well. So very first thing that I want to do, I want to have a new class. I'm going to call it internet connection exception. I can remove this using statement. And I'm going to derive this from exception. And let me bring in the implementation for this. It's a very, very simple class. Not doing anything is as good as I'm just giving a new name for this exception. But you will notice when we start coding, it will help me identify the internet exceptions very easily rather than going and a different way of finding this. I can use the exception hierarchy to find it. So this is an exception, internet exception class that we will create. Just derive it from the exception class and implement the base. There is nothing additional that we are doing. No manual overriding. We can close this as well. Now, one of the extension methods that we want to add is on strings. This is something that we will use immediately. So let's clean it up and we'll call it public static class string extensions. No need for a constructor. And I'm just going to bring in a simple extension method which we will use in our application. This is called clean cache key. What it does, it just takes the URI, any URI that you give it. For example, http://youtube.com/ something question mark colons and so on, and then it will replace all the special characters. For example, the hashes, the ampersands, the parentheses, the colons, the question marks with a space or an underscore in between. Now, why do we need this? If you remember, we were using or we added monkeycache.filestore, which is what we will be using to store the cached information on the local device disk. Now these are stored as files on the device. And if your file name contains any illegal character or something which is not allowed, such as a semicolon, or an ampersand, it will not allow you to save the file. It will throw an exception. So this is just one way of making sure that you do not have any special characters in your file names. We need to add a service. Now this is, let me give it a name first, REST service space. Now in almost every application, you need to work with REST APIs. In this application, we will be working with uh, YouTube APIs. In some other application, you may be working with some other API. And there are some common things that you want to do. For example, you want to make sure that you are connected to the internet. And if you are not, you may want to get the information from the cache and return it to the user rather than returning an error. Again, depending on your requirements. There might be some requirements or some places where, irrespective of whether cached information is available or not, you always want to return the latest information to the users. Uh, Ability to store information in the cache. Uh, Make, delete, patch, put, get API calls very easily, rather than writing the boilerplate code every time in your application. This is a base service class which we can use, and you will see just by calling one method with the right parameters, we will be able to get the information deserialized in the form that we want. For example, the information that comes back from the REST API calls is always a string. The example that we saw in the case of YouTube. Let me go back and see if I have this running. Yes. So you can see this is the information which is coming back. It is in the form of JSON string, but it should be deserialized into a proper object of type, let's say YouTube video. How do we do this? Every time you have to write that piece of code. This is what this class will do. So let's start building this. Again, let me clean it up. Maybe declare something. So I'm going to have an HTTP client which we will be using, and then we'll be using iBarrel. This is the implementation of the cache mechanism which is provided by the monkey cache NuGet package. So let me add using monkey cache, and again same thing I will do. I'll go back to my global using and I'll add it over here in this project, so I do not need to refer it again and again. Now monkey cache, this is a NuGet package which is provided by James Montemagno. It allows you to store or cache the information on your local disk, in SQLite database, and in different providers. So the iBarrel is the interface or the mechanism which can allow you to work with any of these implementations, whether it is file store or SQLite or any other provider. Similarly, we are also going to have one for connectivity. So this is the interface which is available as part of the .NET MAUI implementation. This is coming from previously known as MAUI Essentials, before that Xamarin Essentials. Now this is all baked into MAUI itself. It is not called Essentials anymore. And we have the REST API. I'm going to make sure that no one can instantiate this, so I can make it protected. In fact, I can also make it abstract if required, and it is going to accept connectivity, 2 parameters in the constructor. Just going to assign them. So this is my constructor. I'm going to add another method, set base URL, passing in the API base URL. And then I'm going to instantiate a new HTTP client with this base address. And since I'm working with REST APIs using JSON only, I'm going to add some default headers. Here you go. And I'm also going to define a new method which I can create from any of the implementation, and I can add any additional request headers into my call. Now, this is where the meat of the implementation is going to come in. So rather than bore you, I'm just going to bring in a lot of code and explain to you what is happening over there. Okay. But before that, we have these classes that have come up because of this implementation. So I'm going to add it to my So what is happening in this class? So I have a simple method called getAsync, where I'm just passing in the resource URI and how much duration I want to cache this information for. I'm defaulting it to 24 hours. And then I'm returning it in the form of an object, in the form of a deserialized object. What it is going internally, it is going and getting the JSON result as a string by calling this other private method getJSON_async, passing in the same information, and then deserializing it in the object that we want it and returning it to the main program. So this is what we are going to be using in our application calls. That's all we are concerned about. So you can see, forget about everything else. This is all internal for now. For the caller, when you are using for any API call, you just need to say my application service dot get is async, let's call it YouTube video, the URL, and I want to cache it for 10 hours or 0 hours, etc. So that's all we will need to do. Now, what it is doing internally is this private method where first of all we are creating this cache key, clean cache key, because this is what we will be storing. And then what we are checking is if the cache barrel is provided. Check if the cache barrel is enabled. If it is enabled, what we do, the very first thing we check is we check if we have cache data. If we do have the data stored in the cache for this URL or this clean key that we have created. If not, then we can go and bring it from the internet upfresh. So we are checking, do we have the data? And then we are checking if the cache duration is more than 0, because if I do not want to cache something, I want to get it every time, then I will just pass in duration as 0. And in that case, this whole cache thing is not applicable. So we need to check if the cache duration is more than 0 and the cache data is not null, that is, it is available, and it is not expired as well, because when we set the cache, we also specify the expiry date. So let's say if we set it to expire after 24 hours, then after 24 hours, if I make the same call, it will return me as expired, which means I should not be returning this data and I should be fetching the fresh data. So only if this data is not expired and is available, then I return this cache data. I do not need to hit my API service. Another thing I also need to check is if internet is not available. If internet is not available, then I also need to do something. I need to check that if the cache data was available, then I return the cache data. Otherwise, I throw a new internet connection exception. This is what I meant when I was talking about overriding the exception or creating a named exception, because now I can catch the internet connection exception very easily, and I know that this block is going to handle when internet is not present on my machine. I will show that when we use it in the application calls. So either no cache was found, so this is the section that we have. Either there was no cache found or cache data was not required and the internet was also available. By the way, one other thing we should also be checking is this. If I can in fact bring in the code over here. Then I can say throw new internet connection exception. So in this particular case, if everything is fine, we need to hit our API, simply make the API call, http client.getAsync, passing in our base address of the HTTP client, which we set over here at the top, which was passed from the calling application, and the resource. Get it as a string. And the next thing we need to check that it was a successful return. There was no error. For example, no forbidden or quota exceeded or resource not found kind of exception. If there was an exception, ensure success code or success status code will throw an exception. So you do not need to write any special code such as if response dot return type is equal to say 202 or 200, then only proceed further, otherwise throw new exception. You do not need to do that. So once we have received the response, I can get the JSON string from this, and then at the end I can return this JSON to my previous method call, which is this internal method which our applications will be calling, which we will deserialize. But in between, what I'm doing, I'm checking if caching is required. That is, the cache duration was provided and is more than 0, and the cache barrel was also provided for my application. Then I add this cache with this key and this string value for this duration into my monkey cache barrel. Why we are checking for the cache barrel every time? Because in some of your applications, you may not want to enable caching, in which case, when you create an instance or when you inherit this REST service base, you will not provide the cache barrel. You will leave it empty. You will only provide the connectivity interface implementation. So this is your cache barrel implementation. Now, another thing that I have put in, which we are not going to use in this application, but in my other applications, I do use it. So of course, you want to post something to your REST APIs. You want to put, you want to delete. And again, I've created very simple methods for that. A put async, wherein you just provide for which object, what object you want to put in which URL, and then it will serialize this. Let's say it was a YouTube video class. It will serialize this YouTube video object into the text, and then it will just post it using the post async method and creating a content of type string content. The same thing we are doing for the put, exactly the same thing. Instead of post, we are doing the put async, and every time we are ensuring that it is returning successfully. And for the delete, it is slightly different because delete does not require any payload. So we just call in or call the REST endpoint and call the delete async method. So this is our REST API implementation. So I think that's pretty much it for today. We'll continue again next time, where we'll continue building on this common framework. And once the common framework is done, we will go to the actual implementation of the application. So thank you very much, everyone. Stay tuned for the upcoming content, and please do subscribe to the channel and reach out to me on Twitter if you have any suggestions, any questions. As I said, this is let's keep it as an open conversation. We are all learning from each other. What we are doing over here may not resonate with you. If you have different ways of doing things, please do let us know. Let it be beneficial to everyone in the community. So stay tuned and see you next time.